So without further ado, we welcome Robert.
All right. Thanks, Megan.
Absolutely.
Hopefully everybody can hear me okay and everything. So first off, thanks to PFI for putting this on. It's nice to be able to still kind of do this type of thing, even with the pandemic and everything. And also thanks to Megan for helping me put some of these slides together and everything. So anyway, so let's just get started with this, talking about some rotational grazing stuff on cover crops during the winter. So go ahead, Megan. Just a quick overview, a little bit of history of the farm and myself and the family. We were Century Old Farm in 1876, so roughly 145 years old. I am the fifth generation farmer, and our farm is pretty much primarily just a turkey operation. We started turkeys in 1958, switched to organic in 2001. We also run a cow calf operation, roughly 180 head right now. Row crops, we keep transitioning more and more towards the organic side of things, roughly 520 acres right now in organic and 380 in conventional. So go ahead, Megan. A little bit of background. I went to Luther College, which actually you can see in the background there, and studied environmental studies and graduated in 2014, but basically been farming all my life. So go ahead, Megan. So yeah, I thought location would be key to talk about just a little bit here. We're in Northeast Iowa, also known as the Driftless region. We're just northwest of Decorah, Iowa, just a few miles. And we farm a lot of river bottom ground, so that is subject to flooding. So we have to deal with that from time to time. And then a lot of bluffing land too, as well. You can see all the slopes and whatnot behind on the screen there. And so there's a lot of wildlife damage that we have to deal with as well. Go ahead, Megan. So yeah, let's just the main thing here is how I got started with this grazing, or how we got started, is it's kind of funny in a sense, but I just hated feeding from these silos. It just seemed like it was so inefficient. You know, there was money going into it and there's money coming out of it as far as, energy and whatnot. Very labor intensive, I always thought. You know, during the winters, we'd go up there with pitchforks and have to chip off the silage that's on the walls and whatnot that got frozen. So it just wasn't a fun experience growing up. And it just seemed like every year we were losing money on cattle. And so if you think about, raising cattle, for the most part, usually the winter feeding is your most expensive part of the operation. And so that's where that's what I wanted to focus on. So we'll go to the next one, Megan. Then I just kind of sat down and started educating myself a little bit. And I mean, YouTube is a great source to just go on and look at new stuff that people are coming out with. Erin Silva's a couple videos of her and planting into cover crops, organic system, planting beans into rye. That was one of my first videos that I kind of liked or watched, and that's kind of a whole different story though, with cultivation and organic row crops. But anyway, Gabe Brown and Jim Garish, those are two big ones out there that if you haven't heard or haven't looked them up, definitely do that, because they have a lot of great information on not only just grazing, but grazing cover crops and all that good stuff. And if you can get your hand on some of their books, I know they both have two books out right now too. So go ahead, next slide. Further education, we went to the NRCS office and asked them about, what contracts can we be in, and CSP and Equip are a few of them, but basically try to help us get started with this, the cover crops, some of the no-till stuff on the conventional side. And so that helped. And we'd been doing these for a long time, but I just thought I'd mention those because there's money out there to help you get started, and you don't have to just jump off a cliff necessarily. You got some leeway there. So then we've got some good friends, farming friends, and they got us in touch with Diamond T Ag, and they sell a bunch of compost products and biological products, and more and more I wanted to go this route. I felt like getting into this biological stuff was going to be the key. And then from there, they introduced us to Prairie Creek Seed. And so we went and talked to them about what kind of cover crops we wanted to put in to the mixes, and kind of what I was looking for in our cover crops and what I wanted to get out of them. So I'll go ahead and make it next slide. Okay, so the why we graze cover crops, and I'm going to hit on these each individually in the upcoming slides here, but basically to increase the soil and animal health, increase plant diversity, and then animal behavior. It's amazing how much better you can work with your animals when you do this stuff. Reducing winter feed costs, that's probably one of the biggest ones, and then also increasing your yield, your next year's cash crop. So go ahead, we'll get right into it. So this is just a picture of one of the fields that, go back to that one, Megan, there we go. Yeah, so this is just a picture of one of the fields that I was out digging in with a shovel, and it was just amazing to watch this soil kind of not necessarily change, but to see this, how well the soil was, working for us. They always talk about the black cottage cheese and the chocolate cake and whatnot that you hear all the time. There's so much aggregation in the soil here, and I think that had a lot to say about the cover crops they're using and also the grazing program that we have with it. So definitely a good thing to see in your soil. So go ahead, Megan. And the another big key is this plant diversity. So we used to just put in red clover as our plow down for our next year's cash crop of corn. And so I wanted to mix it up a little bit because I started to understand this idea that different plants bring up different minerals. They work with different microorganisms, and they have different root structures. And so all these things are good to have in your system. And then that also goes into the salad buffet here for your animals. You don't sit at the table when you're eating and only have one course, meal. You have a diverse amount of stuff there that you can get or that you can choose from. So that's what this diversity of cover crops offers your cattle, is definitely a very nutritious salad buffet out there for them to choose for and pick nutrients that they need and whatnot. So yeah, go ahead, Megan. So I don't understand, this 100%, so we did take some forage samples on this is the same field, but just seeded 2 different dates. And so really all I was kind of looking at these, if you look at the left hand of the screen, the bottom arrow there is showing your RFV, which is your relative feed value. And 115 I heard was pretty good, kind of dairy quality stuff. So that was nice to see. And then also just towards the top of the screen, you can see the moisture percentage there. And that was another thing we kind of took into consideration. We actually supplemented a little bit of some dry matter just to kind of extend our grazing days a little further. And then the right side of the screen is just the other side, which was seeded earlier. You can tell that that the RFE wasn't as high in that one, and it was because that got so tall, and it lost some of its we got more quantity out of it, not necessarily the quality, but it's still good stuff. It really was still good stuff, and the cattle enjoyed it a lot. So go ahead, Megan. So this is just a picture of that same field, the 2 different seeding dates. You can see how much growth we have on the left side of the screen there on August 15th, 4.5 weeks after seeding, and then on the right side is the week and a half after seeding. So and then down at the bottom you can see that was taken on September 15th too. So yeah, definitely a different growth there, and I was loving what I was seeing on the left, but then actually once we got into the grazing of it, like I said before, it definitely lost a little bit. The cattle would focus more on the shorter stuff that was more palatable to them. So go ahead, Megan, go to the next one. So I think this is the video here. If it'll go.
Shoot, Robert, it's coming up on a different screen for me. Let's see. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yeah. It's a little bit smaller, but we
Yeah.
can see it. Yeah, that'll work. Anyway, this is just showing kind of the animal behavior. I mean, I'm just walking through the cows and whatnot, and they're not giving a hoot. They're just out grazing and all the heads down. There's no noise and everything. Everybody's calm and relaxed and stuff. So it just, as you work with your cows more and more, obviously if people have been rotational grazing, they understand that your cattle get used to you and trust you and whatnot. You're not just running them through a head gate. And so, that type of thing. So go ahead, Megan. All right, so we can get into the reducing the winter feed expenses. I think this is probably one of the biggest ones that people want to think when they do this. It's got to make sense financially to do this. So we'll go to the next slide here. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through this. This is just one of our fields in 2019 that we grazed the cover crops and whatnot. So it was a 27-acre field. Basically, we got 18 days out of it. The livestock that we had there was 151 cows, 122 calves, and 5 bulls. You can see the average weights there that we used. And then, so I broke it down into a total cow equivalency just to make all the math a little bit easier so you can see how we did that. Then we said that about 35 pounds was what we were shooting for dry matter intake each day. Obviously, it was cold weather. Cows were lactating still. And grazing days, you can see we had to pull them off a little bit because we had some wet weather. So underneath that, you've got your feed prices, what we used for that. We had to feed some oat bales, and then you can see your hay bales and silage value. Now, the silage value, I don't know how other people figure it, but this was just one way. I'm sure there's other ways to do it. And then now going on to the labor, I call this a wash. Now, I think that's a little bit biased towards the feeding silage with your tractors and whatnot, because if you think about the fuel consumption of 2 tractors feeding cattle, and all I was using to strip graze was the 4-wheeler and a little bit of electricity for running the electric fence, there's no comparison there. I mean, you were definitely saving money and fuel and time. And I just think about either leasing or buying one of those tractors too. So that all goes into it. So getting into the strip grazing part of it, we did throw some manure on there, disking, seeding. The seed cost was a little bit higher in this one than our other ones that we were doing kind of now, like this past year's. We lowered that. It seemed like we were overseeding a little bit. We figured that out. And then all these numbers that you see, the per acres, is just from Iowa State's custom survey rate. We're just using those. And now, so breaking down the totals, the first time that I did this, I actually I had the cattle pay for that total expense. But then thinking about it, that wasn't fair to the cattle, because actually this cover crop we were putting in not only to feed them, but we were also putting it in to build our soil for our next year's cash crop, what in nitrogen and whatnot. So I split that. And as you can see, well, I guess let's get into the feeding of the silage. I mean, it kind of speaks for itself here. That's how much dry matter we were feeding them for that day. 18 days, like I said, and then we fed 36 bales, looks like, and so that was a value on those. So you can see the difference there. So grazing covers versus silage and hay, if you take the total expense of the two and subtract them, you're still saving $90 per day by doing that. So that's like saying that's going to make your cash crop next year look really good, because it doesn't have any expenses against itself. And then the bottom, I think this is the way you actually should look at it. The cattle should pay for, or the crop, next year's crop should pay for some of it. So you're actually saving $165.57 per day. So that was very nice to see, and I'm glad we put it on paper, because it just made it all that much better. So go ahead, Megan. Okay, and then so in 2017, it was kind of tough to break that 140 bushel per acre mark for organic farming. Just seemed like we were kind of plateaued at that point. And after implementing that, and because we've been doing this for about 3 years now, after implementing that the first year in 18, and then getting that next harvest of cash crop, which was corn, we hit 173. Now, not all of our acres are doing this. There's you know, a select few and whatnot, but I definitely think that obviously the compost has helped, the grazing has helped, the cover crops. So all this combination has definitely increased our yields and overall the amount of money we're bringing in per acre. So go ahead, Megan. Okay, so the how we graze winter stockpile cover crops. Now, first, this picture, I just want you, this is a picture of the farm here on the lower left. Obviously, you can see the river running through there too, but there's basically main 4 fields here that we use to graze these cover crops. And it works out really well for us because obviously the barnyard is really close. And so if we need to pull them off, we'll just bring them in to the barnyard, and we have winter water sources there. And it's just nice to have that close to the farm. So go ahead, Megan. Okay, so the biggest thing about this, that when I talk to people about it, they're first, when I tell them like, okay, we strip graze these cows through winter stockpile forage, they're like, well, that sounds like a lot of work. Why wouldn't you just let them go out on the field? And my response to that is, well, why don't you just let your cattle have your silage pile for the whole winter? And obviously you're not going to do that. You know, they're going to waste a lot of it. They're going to consume too much. And so it only makes sense to me that you would ration this field out to increase your amount of grazing days that you can get out of that. And I haven't done a side by side yet, but I would really like to say I strip graze this field, but this other field I let them have the whole thing. The hard thing about that is that it's really hard to get the same amount of growth. You know, one field might be more fertile than the other, weather events and this and that. So that's something to take into consideration. But go ahead, Megan, next slide. So another reason on the strip grazing is to increase competition. If you do rotationally graze on pasture, you understand this fully, that if you have cows side by side, they're not going to be very picky on what they want to eat. So they're going to sit there and they're going to eat everything, you know. And so that overall makes for better overall consumption of the field, and they're not really wasting anything. Obviously, you want a little bit of ground cover left, and that's another reason why we strip graze, to move them along and leave a little bit on top for soil cover. So go ahead, Megan. Also with this, the even distribution of manure is another reason why we strip graze. And you can kind of see on the bottom lower left there, you can see some cow patties and whatnot, but normally they will stay in these strips because they'll go out and they'll go for water. If they eat it down quite a bit, they will go out into the stocks and get some more from there. Maybe, but overall, they spend a lot of their time within these strips. And so if you didn't do this, they would be dropping manure elsewhere where you didn't want it, or you kind of get just a more even dispersal of that manure. So that's a good thing when your next year comes around. You don't have an excess here and not enough over here. So go ahead, Megan. Okay, so everybody has plowed their driveway and whatnot, and you can see that after you move that snow, it gets hard the next day. And so snow is very similar to soil, that it has air pockets all over the place. And the more you move it around, the more it gets compacted. And so with strip grazing, let's say that you gave them the whole field and it snowed a lot. Those cows are out there looking for the best thing, and they're moving the snow around, and so then you're gonna lose that consumption on some of the stuff that they could have had, but now they can't get to because it's rock hard and not easily. They're not, cows are not going to dig as much as as sheep would, but they still do. They still will go through and get that through the snow. But that's just one other reason why strip graze, it helps out that way. So go ahead, Megan.
Hey, Robert, can I stop you and ask a few questions?
You bet, go for it.
Okay, so we have a question asking, when winter grazing, so, when cows are trying to graze through the snow, are there specific cover crops that are better than others? And are there concerns with the cover crops freezing and then grazing on them?
Okay, so for I guess the second question, the only reason you would need to worry about any cover crops freezing or whatever is that I think it's that what I don't know how to say it, but it's
Prussic
with,
acid.
yes, there you go. It's with the sorghum sudan grass is the only reason you would want to be worried about that. And I think it's like 7 days or something, or 10
A
maybe.
week to 2 weeks after a
Okay,
freeze.
you should be giving this presentation, Megan. So that would be the only thing you need to be worried about with that. But we don't have to worry about that because we're coming off pastures late, and then we get in and we're able to, sorghum sudan is great for winter because it is taller, so it sticks out above the rest. But you also are going to lose a little quality there because it dies back. Stuff like your rapeseed, your radishes, and turnips and stuff, your brassicas, they're going to stay greener. And so the cattle are really going to focus on those. It's interesting to watch them go through the field, and that's what the first thing that they go for is that. Annual ryegrass and cereal rye and whatnot, those are good too. And we'll get into the cover crops a little bit more here. I have a mix that I'll show you guys, but did
And
that answer?
Robert, are you going to explain your watering system?
Yes, I've got a
Okay,
slide on
so
that.
great. So we won't answer that question yet. So let's
Yep,
just keep going.
you bet. Okay, so going further with that question that you had, which is great, solar wicking. I don't know if a lot of people have heard of this, but it's pretty much just what it is, what it sounds. You have a blade of grass, doesn't necessarily have to be green, but it does help to be green. And if that blade of grass is sticking out above the snow layer and collecting solar energy, that's going to act as like a wick on a candle. As you know, if it's burning or whatever, it's going to melt that wax. Well, that does the same thing to the snow. It melts that snow around, not all of it, but just around that little area, and provides more airspace for that cow to get in there and break through and find that feed. So that's definitely one thing that's nice about having taller forage. So if you do have different heights and whatnot, I would recommend grazing your shorter stuff first. And if you're going to get snow later on, leave that taller stuff so that if a cow can see it, they'll normally go and dig for it. If they can't see it, then they probably won't. I haven't seen that they will do that. So go ahead, Megan. Okay, so bad picture. I was trusting the weatherman here, and it didn't come through for me. Obviously, it rained too much, more than I thought, and not only that, but I think I did not give them enough that one day, and they were all kind of piled up, ready to go into the next pasture, kind of pacing back and forth. So that was partially my fault as well. But another, this is big why we choose to strip graze, because if you have a weather forecast that's coming up with a lot of rain, and let's say you give them the whole field, it's going to be hell to try to get them out of there, and they're going to pug your field up pretty bad, which obviously it happened here, but there was some reasons why on my part that I didn't do this right. So it would have helped to give them a little bit more space here. If you want to graze through some wet weather, you're going to have to give them more space. And so you're going to give up a little bit there. But it's definitely nice to strip graze and have that capability to bring them back into either a sacrifice lot or a barnyard where you can, bed them heavily and keep them off of the ground, because they're gonna pug up your land too. So go ahead, Megan. And this one, so I kind of touched on this a little bit already, but when they go in to a field, they're going to choose the most palatable stuff. They're just like us humans. We're going to go for the stuff that tastes the best. And if you have, let's say, 100 to 200 acre crop field that you have cover crops on and you want to graze it, and let's say you only have 20 cows, that would be the one time I'd be worried about this happening, is that you throw them out there, they go out, pick what they want, and then by the, you think you want to get X amount of days. Well, it's going to be short of that, because they're going to be nutrient deficient in some of these things, because they've already tipped everything that has the most protein value, or something like that. So then in the end, you're going to have to put out protein tubs or supplement in some way to keep them out there so that they can clean up the rest of it. Obviously, you want to leave a little bit out there, but go ahead, Megan. We do, on the supplement side of things here, we do put out a mineral. It's just free choice. They can get it whenever they want, just from their local co-op. But I'm not going to get into that much. So we'll go to the next one. So here's the four-wheeler that we use. I've got her stacked up, ready to go, and we're gonna go put up some fence and cross wires and whatnot. So let's talk about some of the equipment that we use here. So go ahead, Megan. On your left side of the screen there, you'll see two little devices there. This is from Gallagher. This is actually, all this is, it just kind of tells you which way the fault is. This is not necessary. You don't have to have this, but if you have, 20 miles of line out there, it's going to save you a lot of time to know which direction you got to go first. As well as that, I would definitely recommend getting one of those from Oats that go with these energizers. They are the fault finders. They help you a lot to speed that process up. So top of the screen here to the right is the reels that we use. I think the farthest one on the right is a Gallagher. Those are great, a little bit more expensive. And then the other ones are PowerFlex ones. As you can see, there's a handle on them too, the plastic handle. That's important to have to hook onto the wire or your barbed wire fence or whatever. The braid, or so that the wire that we use, definitely don't go with poly wire. You need poly braid. It's more visible and it will last longer. It's just more durable. Obviously, it's a little bit more, but it's definitely worth the price. Then on the bottom right here is Gallagher's fencer. It's probably a little overkill for what we have, but you definitely want that shock to be memorable to those cows so they don't test your fence. And this is a very reliable system, and it's got a little screen on here that tells you your amount of volts and amps and whether you're going to have a fault or not. So that's very nice to have. I would not skimp on that side of things. So go ahead, Megan. Posts, I'll just hit on these quick. There's a bunch out there that you can choose from. The one that we use the most is the pigtail post in the middle of the screen there, the white. Those are the handiest for our operation, and they've got you can run 2 wires off of those too, but the O'Brien posts are good on the right side of the screen, the other white posts, but they seemed like they got really brittle during the winter and they would break off. And once they break off, there was no way to replace that little notch there where you put the wire. One other one I'd like to focus on just a little bit was the one to the left of the pigtails. That is, it's a New Zealand company. Kiwi Tech, I believe, is their name. They have a really good post out there too. So anyway, going on, Megan, we can go to the next. So yes, let's talk about the mix that we use from Prairie Creek C. Now this is actually this past year's mix. The mix that I was talking about earlier with the sorghum sedan, they're all similar. This is all very similar to what we have been using. You basically want to make sure that you have some sort of, some sort of grass and a brassica and either some sort of legume, a clover or something. So if you start on the left side of the screen there, that we have the winter peas and then the mug beans. Those are going to be more of a legume crop for nitrogen. Sunflowers, you got your pollinator stuff in there. Sorghum sedan grass as well as millet, which is on the other side. Those are the big ones that are going to produce a lot of biomass. Red clover, another nitrogen builder, and then your brassica mixes, your turnip, rapeseed, and radish. Those are nice to have in your mix. And so when I look at these things, I like to look at the percent of the blend. So if you go in from the left here, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4 over, and as you can see here, the sorghum sedan grass is 45% of that blend. And so we're really focusing on, we want as much biomass as possible, but I wanted the red clover and the legumes in there to build some nitrogen for next year's corn crop too. So you have to just tell them what you want and they'll definitely work with you to put something together. So go ahead, Megan. Okay, so this is just a short little clip of the four-wheeler. The first time I saw this done, it was amazing, and so I thought, well, I gotta have that. And obviously, it was kind of expensive to buy, so we just built it ourselves. And all it is metal conduit. Did some welding and whatnot. That's a Can-Am four-wheeler. It's nice because it's got 2 little holes in the bottom here that you can put 2 bolts. And I just welded a plate to that and then some pins and whatnot and slid them right in there. And you got to just make sure that it's clear all the way down through so that you can run over that wire. And very cheap. I think it's probably like $30 in the end of putting this together. Obviously, I had some time into it. The back, kind of the same thing, the plate, and then just get a bender, I had a electrician buddy, and he bent some of those metal conduit rods for me, and that worked out really well. So very cheap and very effective. I every time I run over a wire, I still laugh because it's like, wow, that just saved me so much time not having to put in a gate, not having to open a gate, shut a gate, and do that. But again, probably not necessary, but it really speeds your time up and moving cattle. So go ahead, Megan. So here is that overlook of the area that we graze. And to your point here, Megan, with the watering points, they're all just mirror fountain waters, winter waters with the balls, the big blue balls on them. And so, as you can see, we've got a bunch of winter watering sources here. So the black line around the whole outside of this area is permanent barbed wire fence. Now, when you go into the middle here, this red line is the semi-permanent fence that I put up north and south here with 2 reels. With the poly braid and the reels. And so I can open and shut those whenever I want to let them into whatever paddock I want. And then the way that we'll do this then is left to right, east west here, you'll run your cross fences, your breaks, and then you'll just keep working yourself away from the water point so that they can always go back and get water. Yes, they do make some not necessarily ruts, but a cow is going to take the same path, so you kind of have to deal with that. But that's one reason why I don't let them back into the area that I just moved them from. I have them go back out into the stocks and walk, because I know that we're going to do a little bit of tillage, and then we're going to put in our oats, and so I feel like that'll recover from that. So go ahead, Megan, we'll get started. So I believe this is the video here. I wanted to put a video of basically start to finish, how this is all done, so that it can hopefully answer a lot of the questions that you guys might have already. So our rotation is a corn oat rotation. So first you're gonna get that corn off, and then we come back in and we'll disc and put in our oat crop, which is roughly around 2.5 to 3 bushels per acre. And then you'll get it off of the field, swath it, and get it and combine it. It took a while to combine that field. And rake it and bale it, get the bales off the field, and then you're gonna come in and disc it one more time here and put in your forage cover crop. This is a time lapse of that cover crop coming up. You can find this on YouTube if you want to look that up. I think it's on our Prairie Creek seed. So that's that blend growing. And then at certain point there, when it gets, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 inches tall or whatever, we're going to spread on some of compost. This would be during obviously the fall time, late summer. We feel that this does a better job of helping this cover crop grow, but also conserving that nutrients and whatnot in the soil. So we're not putting on directly in the spring. This cover crop itself here got roughly to 6 to 7 feet tall, I believe, in the end. And sorry, it's a little glitchy. But over you can see the 2 different fields. You saw pictures of that before. And then me just walking through it here, it's a thick thick mess. And so it's cool too. It's like a jungle, and a lot of diversity in there. Obviously you saw that blend is very similar to that one. You got your radish and rapeseed there, your cowpeas, and then there's some red clover underneath in the bottom. And but the soil, it was just amazing to see this soil that came about from it when you would go out and dig in it. It was so loose and crumbly and just fell apart in your hands. I thought, wow, we're gonna have something good here. So definitely something to shoot for. We did even have some mushrooms growing out there. I know that some people talk about your the mycorrhizal fungi, the bacteria to fungi ratio. We definitely had some of that going on, and this root structures on this sorghum sedan grass are really amazing to build organic matter, as well as you saw some nodules on there too on the legume crops. So anyway, down the middle of the screen here, if you can see, that's where we're running that poly braid, all the way down the field. So they have access to all the stocks, and then where I'm going through right now, they do not have access to. And so at this point here coming up, I'm gonna be running over one of those fence wires. I think it's right there. And then we'll come over here to where we're going to be letting them in. As you can see, they did venture out and grab some more whatever in the stocks, you know, it's a little more feed in the stocks. They must have ate down that pretty well. So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe I should have been giving them just a little bit more. But anyway, then I'm going to walk back to where the reel is located at, and then reel this side up so that they can come. You can reel both of these up if you'd like, you know, to get them in coming in faster. And like I was saying before, it's awesome to watch these cows come in there because they come running in there and they're looking for the best stuff and trampling a good amount of it, which is just fine. You know, that's going to be organic matter next year. But they were in this mix. They were definitely looking for that whatever was green, the rapeseed, the radish, and whatnot. So everybody's head down, calm, and just eating. So it's a pretty sight. And that's just a close up of what we're missing. So then I'm going to go back with the 4-wheeler and pick up the permanent or the back fence that was the other day. And then unhook it on the other end. I did have a barbed wire fence to work with this time. I have a little device here that I slide out with the 4-wheeler so that I can unroll and roll up. I used to do this with a drill, but it's just as easy just to do it with your hand and then just make that motion with your hand to make sure it all comes on evenly. Then I went back and kind of measured out our next break here. And this was so tall that I had to go through and knock down a lot of the forage and that was there so that it wouldn't ground out. Hooking the wire back up there and then taking off. I mean, the 4-wheeler is so slick. I mean, I don't even have to get off at all, hardly. And just put the pigtail on there and go. And then all you got to do is lean off of the 4-wheeler, hold your brake and put it right in the ground. And then you just keep moving along. It makes this work so easily. I feel lazy doing it this way, but it's so efficient. So when
Hey, Robert,
yep.
what do you remember the date on this?
Oh boy, that's a good question. This would have been late November-ish or so, I want to say, something like that.
That's
Yeah,
good. Cool.
yep, I think it was right around there. So that flag, just to key out, that's how I kind of measure my next where to go. I just drove over the fence there with the 4-wheeler, and then pull your flag, and then you can step out your next day. That way you can kind of even this up. Otherwise, you'd be all over the place. That device I'm just sticking in there is just old re-rod or electric fence post, and you just hook it on there. Obviously, somebody could run through there if it wanted to, but if they respect the fence, they won't. Just lay your wire right over that, and that, you get your power running across the fence there. And that's basically all it is to it. Another shot of the nice manure distribution there. And you can see the breaks where those are at. But overall, it's just, I don't know, it's just fun I had a good time moving them. I mean, yeah, it's work, but still you're saving money. So it was all good after that. And they're enjoying themselves and getting what they need. So how are we doing for time, Megan? We fine?
We have exactly 20 minutes left.
Okay, we should be just fine then. Go ahead. We'll speed through this last little part then. Yeah, so I'm sure people are wondering, like, how did you decide your paddock sizes and whatnot? Basically, I just went out and trial and error. I didn't know what to do, so I just let them have a piece. If they were bellering and whatnot, I knew that I probably didn't give them enough. As you can see, these two pictures both show that if they're reaching under the fence like that, then it's probably because you didn't give them enough. And now they can be a little fussy sometimes, and so you might be like, well, I for sure gave them enough, and but the other way to be more specific on it is this formula right here, and I only got this year, so I would have been doing it before. But you take your 1 square feet, foot there of wet weight, and then you times it by 20%, which they're saying 20% of that is dry matter, and then you get your 20 grams, and then you take that by your square foot or square feet in an acre to get that, your 871 kilograms, and then take that by 2.2 to get your pounds. And so that's one way to figure out paddock per paddock how much you need to be giving them. And obviously through the field, it's going to be a little bit different, so that's difficult, but you can have air in the system. It's not a huge deal. So go ahead, Megan. So I didn't record this field. I watch it very closely and do notes on it yet, but this was one of the fields that I gave them the whole field. I thought, well, let's just try it, And I could definitely tell, I think this was like I think it's a 36-acre field, and we only got about 5 days out of it. Now, it, there definitely was less forage out here. This field isn't as fertile as the other one that you guys just saw, so it's hard to measure that whether or not, like, if I would have strip grazed this, would I've got more days out of it. I'm pretty sure I would have, but I can't say that for sure. Um, but they did do a little pugging, as you can see, not bad. Like, there's no huge mud spots, but you can see they left some prints and whatnot. So, that's one disadvantage. If it really had a bad rain event, you wouldn't been able to get them off of there, and they would have done some more damage. But there definitely was a lot more mud around the water tank and whatnot in this situation too. So, yeah, go ahead, Megan. So the Midwest Grazing Exchange, something that Megan and her team kind of put together. It's a great website. I recommend everybody going and basically, creating an account. It is pretty much a dating site for crop guys and grazers to get in touch and, matchmaker kind of thing, and get them to collaborate and figure something out where they can work this out as far as bringing the cattle to someone other's field that doesn't have cattle and having them graze that, and then maybe splitting the costs and whatnot. But like I said, yeah, you just create an account. It's got a map on there, so you can pin yourself on where you're located at, and then you can see everybody else's area as well. And then you can go, the upper left hand corner there is explore listings, and you can kind of see where everybody's at, and you can put a description of your farm or your cattle or whatever you're doing. You're either a grazer or you're a crop guy. A couple things to keep in mind though is the traveling distance. That's kind of my first thing that I thought of. I was like, well, really, how far do I want to go to do this as a cattle guy wanting to graze cover crops? So that's something to think about. Water access and stuff, that's really important. I mean, I wouldn't want to be one of those if I have to go over there and water them every day. They need to have some sort of water access. And then the acreage amount, that might vary from farm to farm, but it's gonna, how many cows are you going to bring over there for the amount of acres, what makes sense. And then overall, just your costs, if you sit down and do some paperwork and see what your costs are going to be, like using that Iowa State custom survey rate. You just got to measure that and see if it works out for you, and then you can kind of make a deal with either the crop guy or the grazer. So.
And Robert, just for clarification, have you taken your cows to someone else's fields yet, or you just hope to?
Yeah, so I definitely hope to. This just came along here. What was it, Megan? Now it's been
A few months ago. It
a few
started in
months.
October.
Okay, so unfortunately, I haven't got a match yet to, go and take the cows to somebody else's land to graze. Now, if I were to, I think that it would have to probably be within 5 to 10 miles. I don't know if I'd want to go much further than that. Like I said, I have to sit down and do the costs and whatnot, but definitely looking forward to this in the future as more and more people start to learn about it and get their stuff and their information on there, and we'll kind of just go from there to see how things go. But no, I haven't. I had one person contact me, but it just didn't work out. It was too far, or whatever. So good site though. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. So pretty much last slide here, just resources. I mean, it's so easy now to get your hands on great information out there. Gabe Brown's got a bunch of stuff on YouTube, and his book, Dirt to Soil. Jim Garish is the one I've been pretty much obsessed with right now, watching all of his YouTube videos on the strip grazing, and he has a book out, Kick the Hay Habit. I have not read that one yet, but I have read Gabe's, and both just a wealth of information out there to gather from. So go ahead, Megan. I think that is the last one. Yeah, so just my contact information if people need to or want to get a hold of me for some reason, talk about this. Obviously, you can tell I enjoy talking about it and probably could talk about it for a lot longer. But yeah, so I hope you learned something and took something from it. And I guess we'll just open it up for questions, Megan.
Thank you very much, Robert. That was very informative. And we already have some questions here. So, do you have to supplement hay when you're on those fields, like the fields from the video in the winter? Do you supplement hay?
So yeah, that one field example that I gave, we did supplement, I think it was like 9 oat bales. And the reason that we did that was because if you remember me talking about the moisture content in that, it was pretty high. So for us to be able to extend our grazing a little bit further, we wanted to feed a little dry matter to fill them up, and because you have to eat a lot more of that cover crop to fill you up than if you'd have a little dry matter with it, if that makes sense. So we do. Um, Now, I'm probably the wrong one to ask about that. We probably should talk more to a nutritionist or whatever, but we haven't really dealt with that much. Like I said, we've only done some oat bales and some hay bales at times, but not a whole lot, I guess. So if that answers that.
A second part to that question, in the summer, do you have to worry about bloat if the fields are too lush and green?
So yeah, we haven't gotten to that point where we're grazing cover crops in the summer. I would like to do something like that here in the future, but normally in the summer we're just strictly on pasture, and our rotation with organics is obviously the corn and the oat, and then after the oats come off in late July, we try to get in there and get our cover crop established as soon as possible so that we can then graze that in the winter. So I think you probably would. So you would want to make sure that before they go in there, if it is lush and green, we usually use a bloat block. You can we buy ours at Thornton's Feed here in Decorah, but yeah, just it's cheap protection if it doesn't cost very much, and it helps to eliminate some of the risk there. But I would, yeah, if you're going to do over to the summer or whatnot, I would definitely want to make sure you knew what kind of blend you had out there. If it was rich in clovers and whatnot, I would be a little worried about that. But because there is, that's why a lot of people go with these diverse mixes, though, is so it's not just one thing. So then they're going to have a diverse mix of stuff to choose from. So, but yeah, great question.
Robert, we have a question regarding, grazing on other people's fields. Are there plenty of landowners within 10 miles of your location?
I personally believe so, but a lot of them, how do I say this? They're the older generation, and that it's sometimes hard to teach an old dog new tricks, if you will. And I don't mean any ill will on that, but I think we just need to educate more people around us a little bit better. And I think that I haven't done a good enough job of getting our information out there. This is definitely going to help, and that the grazing site is definitely going to help. But I don't think many people know about it yet, and know that this is a thing. That, hey, I'll bring my cattle to your property. And then the other thing to add to that is that I don't think a lot of crop guys know the benefits of what cows can do to your operation. I think a lot of people think, well, get the cows out of there, they're just going to compact the ground and whatnot. But if they're managed properly, they can bring a host of a lot of beneficial bacteria and stuff to your microorganisms to your soil that you might not get otherwise. Um, so yeah, it's definitely a good thing. I wish that I knew more. I know all my neighbors and whatnot, and I just need to kind of maybe convince them to start doing this more. But since we're so sorry, I'm being long-winded here, but if we're so corn and beans, so not a lot of people have an opportunity to get this cover crop in, and so that's where I think is if the NRCS or the government or somehow could get some subsidies out there to initiate a third crop into the rotation, like an oats, rye, wheat, or whatever, that would change the game completely on all this. And I think that people would figure out that your next year after that, even if it was a conventional field, you would see benefits in not only yield, but you're reducing your amount of chemical fertilizers that you need to use on that field. And so overall, it's just a benefit. So yeah.
So, Robert, we have someone that's asking for a bit of advice. She is transitioning some CRP land that's been in CRP for 27 years into a regenerative farm, and their current plan calls for clovers and hay for quick cash flow and to help reduce invasive plant pressure. Do you think that oats would be a better option at this stage than hay?
Oh boy. Yeah, I guess that kind of all depends maybe. I guess that's answer. I guess all depends on where you're at and on what your future goals are, I suppose. But it's not a bad idea. I guess oats is going to give you a pretty lush growth right away. Hay is obviously, your perennial, it's going to come up after you cut it again. I mean, oats will do that too. Um, but yeah, that I guess I don't know. I would assume that oats would help for biomass, quick growth and biomass, and it hay or oats can be, you know, um, nutritious too, very nutritious, just like hay. Probably not as much, but it is a little cheaper too. So those are a couple things to think about. But yeah, sorry, I'm not. I know I'm not probably answering that one as I should, but I
Thanks,
don't think you
Robert.
can go wrong. Yeah, I think either way you're onto something there.
We have a few more questions. Do you need to have some shelter for them in the winter, or are round bales enough to serve as a windbreak?
So we always used to put up a round bale windbreak. We don't anymore. That was when we had a spring and fall calving herd. We had to keep them separated, so only the one herd got to come into the barnyard. Um, it is nice to have, and I would, cold, wet, and windy is just a bad combination, and especially if you have calves out there or whatnot. So definitely, if you do have calves, I would, would want something out there to block that wind at least. Maybe not, they don't need a cover, but at least something to block the wind, and then some bedding bales and whatnot, I think would be sufficient enough for that operation. And that brings up a good point too. If you were going to someone's property, that's another thing that you will probably want to look for is, hey, do you have any windbreak and whatnot? And I know that they make portable windbreak stuff, and I've been thinking about that as I, look into more of this website. It's like, well, yeah, what if it's just a field out in the middle of nowhere? What are we going to do? Well, if you could probably haul either some bales, and then you could either, you could feed off of those if you need be. But yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that it's important to have that. Maybe it all depends on your cows too, or how, Gabe Brown, he always says, he doesn't have anything for them. He just leaves them out there. And the ones that, don't do well, don't belong on the farm. It might sound a little bad, but it's something.
Robert, are all your crops and livestock organic?
No, so we're still a split operation. We still our turkeys are organic. Our cattle are not. We did try organic cattle in the, what was it, early 2000s, but it just didn't pan out. I would like to someday go back to that. And then our crops, like I said before, we are rotating more and more into organic because we just feel like, for one, we feel it's healthier, not only for the soil, the animal, but for us as well. I don't really want to be around the chemicals and whatnot, but we still do. We still do some conventional work with chemical fertilizers on our other acres there, but that's becoming less and less. Those acres that are conventional, we try to make sure that we put a winter cover crop down of either a combination of rye and wheat, winter wheat, and we try to no-till. We try to make sure to no-till on those crop acres too. It's always been this dilemma to me, is like, well, what's the healthier soil? Is it organic with a little bit of tillage and cover crops, or is it no-till with a little bit of herbicide spray and cover crops? So I've never really established it depends on who you talk to, on whether they want one is better than the other. So I'm still stuck in that situation of what's better. But we're leaning towards the organic because it does pay better too. There's a premium out there for it.
Robert, do you market your oats or do you feed them, or
We
both?
do yeah, we do both. So we do feed a little bit of it, but uh, we have sold to grain millers in St. Ansgar before. We've sold to a local guy here in town, other guys, neighbors and whatnot that might need it. And I will say that sometimes we don't sell it as organic oats, but we still feel that it is a benefit in the long run. Organic oats, I think, is roughly $5 right now, and you can sell conventional if, what is it, maybe $3 or something like that, 250. I don't know. It's definitely not as good, but even if we sell it as conventional, we still see a profit within, maybe not that year necessarily, but after we sell our organic corn crop. And I will say that our organic corn crop, we feed pretty much all of it to our organic turkeys. So that works out good for us. We have that market, but I know there's market out there for it if you look.
Robert, I know that you farm with your father. I'm curious, how did what did your dad think of all this? How did you convince him to try some of these new things?
Yeah, so it's definitely difficult, but we find ourselves in the same situation that he was with his dad. And it was, my dad was trying to come up with all these new ideas, and my grandpa was not seeing eye to eye with that. But the thing is, and so we're kind of going through that same thing with my dad and I as well. And the thing is that there's going to be change, and change is definitely hard, and especially if you're a little bit older, change is that much more difficult. And I will say that I have to limit the amount of new ideas that I throw into this operation because my dad can only take so much. He's busy enough as it is, to try to change something up, or, tell him that, hey, we're doing this wrong. We need to do it the other way. And, his response is, well, we've been doing it this way for 60 years or whatever. It, the old saying is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I thought I liked that saying, but now I come to hate it, because if you say that, then you're just kind of stuck in this situation of doing the same thing over and over again. And if it doesn't work, isn't that the definition of insanity?
Right.
But but yeah, my dad has been great as far as bringing on this new stuff very slowly. And if it was just me, I'd probably jump into this full force, and I might fall right on my face too. So I would definitely say, you know don't go whole hog into this right away. Start small. Like when we did organic, we only did like 4 acres right away, and then from there it just took off. So start small with it, and learn from your mistakes, and that's how you really just build upon this. And it's slower than just going in, you know everything right away, but it's safer too.
Great pieces of advice. Okay, we have time for two more questions. So, are you putting wire posts in the ground during the winter when the ground is frozen? Um, or do you do that before the ground freezes? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. I thought this would come up. So the semi-permanent fences, that I try to make sure that I have that wire fence in before it gets tremendously cold, because once it starts to get cold, my motivation goes down the drain, just like anybody else would. But when I'm putting up these semi-permanent, the breaks and break fences, fence, if it does get like the ground gets solid, I will take out a little portable drill. And obviously it takes a little longer to do that, but it's easy. You just bend over and you drill a hole and you put your pigtail post in there. So adds a little bit to the time, but I still think it's beneficial. And another thing that I will add to that is, if you can grow a lush, thick cover crop, that cover crop is going to take you further into the winter, because it has this insulation that helps with the ground and keeping it soft. And if you can find a radish hole or whatever, I found that if I go across the field and it was frozen, I try to find a radish hole, or a radish to go stick it through, and it works easy. It goes right through it.
Okay,
So,
Robert, one last question. Can you elaborate a bit on what the biggest barrier to certifying your cattle organic was?
oh, well, so that was a little bit before my time. And it wasn't necessarily the certification of the cattle, but I think the economy kind of took a crash at the time that we were trying to do it, and we were selling our cattle to Organic Valley, um, and things just weren't working out that well. So I can't really expand on that too much, because I wasn't involved a whole lot at that point with it, as far as the financial part of things and why things kind of fell apart. But like I said before, I think that there is hope in that in the future here, now that we've learned to start, well, grazing cover crops to cheapen up expenses, and rotational grazing in the summer months to take us further into the winter, so that we don't have to have those feed costs. And so maybe that was one of the reasons that it wasn't working out. It was too much expense to feed that group of cows through the winter and whatnot. So no, yeah, I'm sorry I can't answer that one in more depth, but
Robert, we have come to the end of the hour, and I just want to thank you so very much for sharing all of the information that you've shared with us. Your story is inspiring. So wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.